Oppenheimer After the Bomb. Practically synonymous with the atomic bomb, and even considered by many to be the father of it, J. Robert Oppenheimer dedicated several years of his life to its birth and development. Began his passion for theoretical physics at Harvard College, he continued to research and experiment with the subject, until his path crossed with that of General Leslie Groves, the head of a military policy committee in charge of the Manhattan Project. Groves was so impressed with Oppenheimer's potential for organization that he appointed him as the director of the project. Oppenheimer was issued a military clearance, and the rest is history. But what happened to him after the bomb? Surely everyone was proud of bringing the war to an end, as their consciences convinced, but that certainly was not the end of Oppenheimer. After the war and the public disclosure of the Manhattan Project, Robert Oppenheimer became somewhat of the national voice for the sciences. As many countries lusted after the nuclear bomb's destructive power, he and many other scientists felt that the only way the world could be secure from a nuclear threat would be by utilizing a transnational committee such as the United Nations. This was not in the best interests of big business America, however, nor in the interests of their ideological mortal enemy, the USSR. Nuclear power was something to be used to bring pride and a sense of dominance to a country, so nuclear arms race was inevitable. With so much experience in nuclear physics and the prestige of the atomic bomb on his side, Oppenheimer was chosen in 1947 as the chairman to the Atomic Energy Commission's General Advisory Committee, a position that gave him no actual power but great influence on matters of nuclear energy such as project funding, laboratory construction, and some foreign policy. He pushed for the funding of basic science and education and tried hard to keep the policies away from the foreseeable arms race. One challenge the committee faced was when the idea of creating a hydrogen bomb came about. At first, Oppenheimer greatly opposed the notion for both ethical and practical reasons. After all, his previous creation was responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 people. How much more blood would be on his hands if he aided in creating an even more powerful bomb? Also, at the time, there was no real practical design for the bomb yet, and he felt that efforts should go into building a large supply of fission weapons. His beliefs were totally ignored in 1949 when the Russians tested their first atomic bomb and President Truman launched the program to create the hydrogen bomb. His opinions of the project did not stay that way, though. In 1951, two scientists by the name Edward Teller and Stanislaw Ulam came up with what would later be known as the Teller-Ulam design for an atomic bomb. Oppenheimer changed his opinion of the project and later explained his change of attitude for the task. The program we had in 1949 was a tortured thing that you could well argue did not make a great deal of technical sense. It was therefore possible to argue that you did not want it even if you could have it. The program in 1951 was technically so sweet that you could not argue about that. The issues became purely the military, the political and the humane problems of what you were going to do about it once you had it. This quote seems to summarize how Oppenheimer felt of the conflict made by the military government. On one hand, the physicist in him wanted this to be completed for science, but the humanitarian in him knew full well what it could mean for innocent civilians. After all the years spent serving his country, Oppenheimer was about to learn a rude lesson on patriotism and paranoia. Even before his involvement with the Manhattan Project began in the early 1940s, Oppenheimer was no stranger to close surveillance. With the fear of the Soviets on the rise, no one was safe from the Soviet witch hunt. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had bugged Oppenheimer's offices, tapped his phones, and even opened his mail. His political enemies were given incriminating evidence of his communist ties. A great scandal exploded in 1950 when Paul Crouch, a Communist Party organizer, testified before Congress that Oppenheimer had hosted a communist get-together at his home when he was at Berkeley. It was proven that he was at Los Alamos at the time, and Crouch became known as an unreliable source. Then in 1953, an Atomic Energy Commissioner, Louis Strauss, through pressure towards President Eisenhower, had Oppenheimer's security clearances revoked. Hearings took place for Oppenheimer to determine his threat to national security through communist ties. In these proceedings, he was caught in a lie told years ago and was taken off the committee. A decade went on, and Oppenheimer was gradually forgiven by the United States for his past. In September 1957, France made him an officer of the Legion of Honor. On May 3, 1962, he was elected a foreign minister. He was elected a foreign minister of the Royal Society in Britain. He was even presented with the Enrico Fermi Award by President Johnson as a sign of political rehabilitation. This ascension could not have come at a more opportune time in Oppenheimer's life, as he was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1965 and died at the age of 62 after failed surgery on February 12, 1967. He was survived by his wife Kitty, his son Peter, and his daughter Toni. Oppenheimer lived quite a life, from creating and witnessing the most efficient killing machine of the time to becoming the face of science for a solid decade. He was admired by his peers as a genius and vilified by those running the very nation he saved in a fit of paranoia. As the father of the atomic bomb, it is difficult to live past that title, but Oppenheimer continued to contribute to the sciences, made several more profound discoveries. The bomb was just one of his many countless achievements.